going to say some things in this video that are controversial that really should not be controversial. But I want to start with who this video is actually for. If you're a home studio producer, you're producing music, and you're not very happy with the quality, you're feeling like it's not sounding professional, it's sounding pretty amateur, this video is for you. And here's my biggest advice to you. Stop mixing. I can imagine all the comments right now, like coming down below this video. All right, there it is. Video over. Stop mixing. That's it. You're gonna want to watch all the way till the end, because if you are a beginner producer, or even if you've been doing this for a couple of years and still struggling to get professional quality, I think I'm gonna shed some really significant light that is gonna really help you. I'm gonna give you some solutions at the end of this video as to what you should be doing, so you're not walking away with just stop mixing and then that's it. And then you're like, what do I do? So let's just jump right into it. The reality is that production and producing music actually has three phases, three very specific phases. I'm gonna do it over here. So there is phase one, and that is pre-production or pre-prod, okay? Now this is songwriting, this is planning, actually coming up with a plan for your production, and this is the starting point. Then there's phase two. Phase two is actual production, okay? This is where we're actually going to be recording, this is where we're actually building the arrangement, we're getting performances, we're actually putting together the actual production. It's the actual production component. And then three, there is post-production. So we have these three different phases of production right here. But the thing is that most home studio producers who are just getting started, they're gonna focus pretty much all of their time on this guy right here, the post-production one, which is mixing and mastering. That's what everyone kind of spends their time on YouTube doing, watching mixing tutorials. But the problem is that the post-production part of this, the mixing part, is like basically maybe the last 15% of the entire process. The problem is that most of you are spending all of your time on this guy right here, the 15%, and then essentially ignoring the rest. The production component here, production, however, is going to take up pretty much like the other 75%. And then pre-production would be like 10%, let's say. Now you might be thinking, why is this important? What does this have to do with me stopping mixing? Well, this actually has everything to do with why you should stop mixing. So let me break it down to you this way. Each of these phases, pre-production, production, and post-production, are what you would call compounding phases. In other words, these phases each impact each other, okay? So the pre-production is going to impact the production, and then the production is going to impact the post-production. So think about it this way. If you have a really bad song, then do you think that's going to affect the rest? I hope you would say yes. A bad song is going to impact the production, and it's also going to impact the post-production, because the truth is that a bad song is not going to be fixed by being better at production or better at mixing. Therefore, a bad song is basically just a bad song, and a bad song is also going to result in a bad production and a bad post-production. It's just a bad song. So maybe that's not where you're starting, and many of you are not starting from a position of having bad songs. But I can tell you, I've taught literally hundreds of producers. In the last year, I have analyzed and given feedback on like 500 songs from amateur producers. I think I know what I'm talking about on this. So here's what the average home studio producer does. The average home studio producer starts with a good song, okay? Many times these songs are actually good. Yay! But the problem is that they take this good song and then they have a very average production. That is not a good thing. So they have a very average, or it might even be poor production, okay? And then somehow they expect that this will then lead to a great mix. Friends, that's just not how this works. That is literally not how it works. Remember what we said right in here. These are compounding. Each phase is going to impact the phase that comes after it. If you have a great song that comes in and then has very average production, or poor production, or less than professional production, that is not going to result in a great mix. Even a quote-unquote great mix is still not going to sound great. So instead, I'm going to propose to you that if you are in this position right here, where you are making average productions, what you need to do is you need to stop worrying about post-production almost entirely. And I'm not saying don't do any mixing, okay? I want to be very clear about this. I'm going to make this even more clear as we get into this. I am not saying don't do any mixing, but I'm saying stop worrying about it. Stop getting so focused on mixing. Stop watching mixing tutorials. Stop learning about EQ and 5,000 different EQ and compression tutorials, because those are not the things that are actually going to get you this production component to sound incredible. So what does this actually look like? Okay, so what you need to do is focus on the production component. Okay, now what is production going to actually involve? This is obviously going to involve recording techniques, getting great source, getting great performances, sound selection. That's one of the biggest ones. Okay, so some of the biggest things that I actually see as problematic, some of the biggest problems are this: sound choice. So sound choice is usually a really big problem with home studio producers, amateur producers who are not making productions that sound incredible. What's the other one? The other one is poor. This is arrangement. Poor arrangement. If you have arrangements that are really not well done, you're overdoing certain frequency ranges, you are not arranging dynamically, you're not arranging with expression, you're not actually thinking about the idea of push and pull, of tension and release, of contrast, then guess what? Your arrangement is not going to be interesting. It's just not. Some of the other aspects, drums, like for real. In my Producer Accelerator course, we do Feedback Friday every single week where I give feedback to my students and actually listen to their music. I think that in virtually every single Feedback Friday session, drums comes up. Literally every single time. Because drums are one of the biggest mistakes that I see home studio producers making. What's some other ones? MIDI. Just not working with MIDI in a way that's actually good, making mistakes with MIDI, not having realistic sounding pianos, or making strings that sound super artificial, or not actually focusing on the actual velocity controls of MIDI. Vocal production. Okay, now this can go into not only just the performances, because I can just tell you, a lot of times the vocal performances themselves are just not good enough. Think about it this way. When you're recording something for a production, it is permanent, so get performances that are actually worth keeping permanent. And not only that, but this also comes down to the arrangement of the vocals, doing vocal layering, vocal doubling, gang vocals, harmonies, BGVs, all of this stuff just not done and executed in a way that's actually good. Or, hate to break it, vocal editing, just not actually editing their tracks, which actually is a whole thing. Editing. The number of producers who just literally do not edit their tracks and then wonder, why does my stuff not sound professional? That's why. So here are just, 6 of many mistakes that I could point out that I see on a daily basis. But what was that you were saying about mixing being the reason your productions don't sound professional? So we have all of this laid out here. And you might be thinking, Nathan, that's great, but what on earth am I actually supposed to do about this? Like, what am I supposed to do when I actually do finish a production, even if it doesn't sound the best? Like, even if I'm still making amateur productions, don't I still have to mix, right? I still got to do some mixing, right? Let's talk about that. Let's clear the board. What do I do with this, Nathan? What am I supposed to do with this? What I wish I could say is, it's easy. Just do these steps. Unfortunately, that's not the answer. This is actually going to take hard work. It's the thing that no one wants to hear and is 1,000,000% true. It's going to take some work. But first, I'm going to share something about myself with you that I've never shared on this channel before. Ready? So I've been producing music professionally since I was 19. It's like almost 10 years ago. So quite a while. But the truth of the matter is that I spent hardly any time mixing productions, mixing tracks, even for professional projects, commercial projects. I spent virtually no time actually mixing apart from volume and maybe some corrective EQ. And I honestly didn't even really actually understand compression that well. And guess what? I was still doing it professionally. And guess what else? My clients were always happy. They were always happy with what they got. I never had a client say, I'm not paying you. So what does that say? I think that actually should hopefully give you some encouragement. Encouragement that if you don't know everything about mixing, like I didn't know everything about mixing, and I would even say that mixing is something that I've only gotten, pretty good at in the last few years. But yet I'm still able to consistently make amazing productions. So here's what you need to do. What you need to do is step 1, is you have to, as we've talked about, focus on production, okay? This is the very reason why this YouTube channel right here, I have maybe a total of 5 tutorials on like actual mixing on my entire stinking channel, and I post a video like every single week, and I've been doing that for a while. So focus on production, okay? So fix the mistakes that I've already talked about. So fix mistakes, okay? Again, I have videos on this channel that go through a bunch of that stuff, but I know that that's probably not the answer you're looking for. So then what is number 2, okay? So we'll actually talk about mix. What should you be doing with mix? Like, how should you go about actually mixing a project? Ready? Here we go. Volume. You need to start getting better at understanding how to mix with volume. Plain and simple. If you have a production that is a killer production, we'll just do it over here. Killer production. If you have a killer production, and if you work on volume as the first one, okay, so that's That's one. Volume. What is number two? Number two is corrective EQ, okay? This is actually very, very easy to do. Corrective EQ is not hard. People really, really, really overthink this stuff. Corrective EQ, specifically in the lows, okay? That's really the majority of the stuff that you actually need to fix. Even high EQs that are maybe a little harsh and stuff like that, usually, as long as you have a really good production and you get the volume managed properly, usually those highs are not going to be super problematic. And then the third thing is space, reverb, and maybe some delays. And you really only need to understand space in a very basic level. And guess what? The funny thing is that space actually correlates back to volume. A lot of people are like, how do I get better at reverb? Well, so much of it is just pick a reverb, find a reverb that sounds good, and then make sure you blend it volume-wise in a way that doesn't sound overpowering or underpowering. Simple as that. And spoiler, I use presets literally all the time on reverb specifically. So if you think that pro producers and pro mixing engineers don't use presets, that's just garbage. So if you get volume, some basic EQ, and space, if you do literally just these three things, and you'll have a actual killer production, then guess what? That is going to sound like 90% of the way there, and the average listener won't even know that it's not mixed. So here's the thing, in exactly 1 week from today, publishing this video, we're launching our course 14-Day Music Producer. We cover all of the stuff related to production in 14 days, and you get to follow along in a 14-day challenge to produce one of your own songs, start to finish. You're gonna watch me produce a song start to finish. You're gonna see how I actually get a killer production and how I'm able to actually do pretty much all of these basic things to make it sound absolutely incredible. So if you're stuck making amateur sounding productions, you should 100% consider joining 14-Day Music Producer. I have a link down below where you can join the waitlist, where we'll be announcing a huge discount when we launch, or if it's already live by the time you watch this video, we'll update that link so you can jump in. We'll see you in the next one.